You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 28, we discuss prime versus zoom. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and my co-host Josh Galicki. Hey Josh, not been too long since we last spoke, but how's the last week treated you?
Hey, not too bad. I haven't gotten much shooting done other than a little bit of macro work out in the garden, but other than that, status quo.
Yeah, I've not done much either in the last week or so. I mean, autumn has certainly arrived here, that's for sure. Temperatures dropped, and we've had thunderstorms and a bit of rain. Those have cleared away now, and hopefully the forecast doesn't look too bad over the coming week. But yeah, it's definitely, there's a nip in the air now. We had a slight, or so Jennifer says this morning when she went out with to walk Sky early. There was just a touch of frost, which is very, very unusual. It's unusual at any time of year now, but very unusual in September, particularly early September. So yeah. Maybe a sign.
We could use the rain over here. I could tell you, it's been dry as a bone. I've just finished some shoreline reparations here that I was sharing some pictures, I think, with you, Rob, recently.
Yeah, it looked like pretty major work.
Yeah, it was crazy, and they had to, do some grading, and the yard gets torn up, so there's a lot of grass planted back there. I have no idea how I'm going to water all that, so I'm hoping we get some rain soon.
I'm sure it'll arrive. I mean, with us, it just sort of arrived in these sort of heavy deluges, which cause flooding everywhere, and you know what it's like. It doesn't come down in little bits at a time. We just get the whole lot dumped on us in one go. But so we've had some pretty manic sort of thunderstorms and whatever. And I know one of our neighbors, one of their dogs ran off, on the great big clap of thunder, and they were looking for that most of the day. I found it in the end, but it's been pretty manic. We were actually in Wales, over the last weekend, so we weren't around, but you can see the aftermath of where the heavy rain came down, with all the things sort of all the debris and things lying across some of the paths and things. But so it must have been pretty spectacular. And of course some of the I've been out of my window from the room that I sit and record these things in. I've been watching swallows and house martins just all gathering together, ready to fly south again, and they've all been sat on the telephone lines outside my windows. That's been fun to watch. So they won't be here for much longer.
It's amazing to see that. Actually, I've been watching 2 purple martins have been moving through in really big numbers now, and I see congregations of them moving down. Gulls too. I've got some songbirds moving through the yard. But to see the purple martins, it's actually really cool, especially when they're all in this case, or in our case, purple martins. But when they're lined up along the telephone wires and you start to see them move around, I mean, it's pretty wild. They're fairly early migrants too, I know.
Yeah, I think we've had a pretty good year by the look of it, because obviously these are the youngsters. You can see because with the swallows, their tails aren't sort of fully grown yet, so you get a bit stumpy. So you can tell they're this year's, and there are some good numbers. Out when I go out with Sky and I walk across the fields, they're always sort of flying over my head, and there are dozens of them. So I think we've had a good year, despite the sort of what seems to certainly been a lack of insects this year. So they must have found enough food, which is encouraging, because I certainly haven't seen it. There's been a distinct lack of things bothering me, wasps and and midges and that sort of thing this year. And I've seen very, very few butterflies and grasshoppers and crickets and those sorts of things. It's been quite concerning, really. But they've obviously found enough food, which is good news.
It's funny that you mentioned that, and I often wonder, because you see Breeding Bird Atlas, you see all these things where they'll try to track bird populations and so forth. I've never looked into this before, but I wondered if there's any scientific way of tracking insect populations. I suspect there are, because there's so many more. But anecdotally, whenever I drive now at night and I have the headlights on in the summer, I mean, years ago, I remember your whole grill would be splattered. I hate to say it, but it was just bugs, moths, anything. Your windshield now, barely anything. And again, it's just what I'm seeing. I don't know what the data says, but I would imagine that.
No, I agree. I mean, it's exactly the same situation here, and it's a comment I've made a few times to people, and who agree, because remember 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as you say, forever cleaning the windscreen of the car. And when you come to clean the car, on the very few occasions I clean my car,
Same here.
it was a tough job in certain months of the year, getting rid of all
Yeah.
those dead moths and things. But yeah, don't really get that anymore, which is concerning. But there is something over here called the big butterfly count, which happens at sort of late summer. And there's a lot of people that in this country will count the species and the numbers in their gardens and then supply the data into a central database. So that's been going on, and that really has been tracking a very marked decline, both, well, particularly in numbers, but also species, I think, I mean, there are certain things that I get regularly in the garden normally, and I haven't seen things like marbled white. I think I've seen one maybe in the garden this year. Normally in July, I would see them regularly, but I haven't seen many butterflies as a sort of whole this year in my garden. I mean, I've probably half a dozen species, which is really bad. Normally I get, I don't know, 3 or 4 times that.
That's something.
It is. And hedgehogs, I was thinking about that the other day. When we first moved here, we were going off piste here a little bit, and but I'll say it anyway. When we moved here, which was 6 years ago, I would have up to 4 hedgehogs virtually every night during the summer and the autumn come in, and they would basically clean up under the bird table. Now, I haven't been feeding the birds over the summer this year, so that might have something to do with it, but I've only seen 1 hedgehog in my garden this year, which is which is crazy. I mean, they would be in every single night. And there was Jennifer bought me a hedgehog house, must have been 3 or 4 years ago. I remember the first winter I put that out, we actually had hedgehogs using it, and they hibernated in it over that first winter, but not since. It's been a bit worrying.
There was an HBO, it was a limited series. It came out in the late 2010s. I can't remember, maybe 2018, 2019, something like that. It was called, I don't know if you watched it, Rob. It was called Years and Years. And it probably took place around now, 2024 into 2025. And it was kind of a near distant future projection. And there's a grandmom in the show. It's actually takes place in the UK. And she sits there and she's like, I haven't seen a butterfly in years. And that one line stuck with me when she said that. Obviously, it goes to what you're saying, the strong decline of these things. But that freaked me out when
it's happening. It's happening in every, or it seems to be, certainly in the UK, in every single environment. I mean, as a kid, I was like mad keen on fishing, which is really where my love for the outdoors and wildlife comes from, because of course I spent so much time in nature that you couldn't ignore all the other things that were going on around you, and being sat still for a while and being very, very quiet, you got to see loads of things that you wouldn't ordinarily see. So that's where my love of all this stuff comes from, because I just spent my life outdoors as a kid. And I've very, very recently sort of picked up that hobby again, and tried to get back to some of those places that I used to visit when I was a child, and they are a shadow of their former selves, with sort of fish populations they're just non-existent, or it seems to me, or certainly not the way they were when I was a child. I mean, I remember small streams being black, literally the beds of those streams would be black with minnows, and there's nothing, and of course they're the building blocks for everything else. I mean, they're the prey species for the bigger fish that are in there, and then of course then you've got the things that prey on the fish, and it's just it just seems to me, and I don't want this to sound negative, but this is the only way I can be with it, really. It's just that they're not the same environments they were previously, and they certainly don't hold that biodiversity that they did 40 years ago, which is shocking, really. and you would find certain areas of and this is a chalk stream in southern England, which should be, well, rich with life, and was when I was a child. And literally, it would be very, very, particularly if you fished at the weekend, would be very, very busy with other people. You go there now, there's hardly anybody, and that's because there's nothing to catch. And that tells you, that tells a story. A bit like going back to our conversation with Jay a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So anyway, on that positive, uplifting note, we really ought to get onto the subject we said we were going to discuss, which is
there's subjects still left in the wild. Let's talk about how to shoot them with what lens.
Well, there's subjects still left to photograph. let's talk about it. So I wrote a magazine article recently, which was I think sort of based on a conversation I had with Georgina a while ago, and this is all about prime versus zoom lenses, because let's face it, zoom lenses have got so good now. My question to people was, is there any life left in the prime lens at all for wildlife photography? So let's throw that out there, and let's have a chat about it. So Josh, I know that you've used both. I mean, I've used both, but I've never ever owned a 500mm plus prime lens, because one, I've never really had the spare cash to buy one, and two, it never really suited my style of photography. But I know that you've owned a few primes over the time, and you're now using zooms as well. So from your perspective, how have things changed over recent years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I've shot with both. And as you have mentioned, zoom lenses have gotten much better, in my opinion, over the years. And certainly there's pros and cons to both. I will say recently, I've been shooting the majority of my time out back. And so it's a repetitive location, and you never know what you're going to see, because I can have migrants come through, or there's the birds that live there for most of the year or during specific seasons. I like the flexibility of having a zoom. So I have a Canon 100 to 500 that I'll use a lot. And I can go wide, I can get animal scapes, I can go in tight. The depth of field can sometimes be a challenge because it's not a shallow depth of field. When I'm at 500, I'm at f7.1. Also, I'll have to bump up the ISO. So there's always some back and forths in terms of compromising between the two, between a prime and a zoom. But I find that they're very flexible. And if you're going into a situation and you don't know what you're going to encounter, I'd much rather go in. And if space is a consideration, because I'm in a kayak, I can't bring multiple lenses. Typically, I just like to bring one setup. So you cannot go wrong with a zoom. If I know what I'm going to photograph, and I know what the situation is going to demand, a good recent examples in the spring when I shoot songbirds. These are small little warblers, tanagers, and whatnot. They're like 6 inches, 8 inches. And it's very hard to get close to them. I will use my 600 prime. Sometimes I'll have the 1.4 tele on it as well, just because of the size of the subject and what you want to convey. I mean, I've even shot them with wide angles with trap setup. So again, it depends, but you cannot beat the flexibility of a zoom. There's pros and cons of each. If I had to look at a zoom, I love the flexibility of it. That's probably the main advantage. The few compromises you have to make, and this may have changed recently with newer models, but when it comes to the ruggedness and durability, you can sometimes get dust inside the lens. Some have an internal zoom function, some it's physical. You turn it, and like my 100 to 500, whatever the right terminology is, you turn the zoom function, and the actual lens extends out. My 70 to 200, it doesn't do that, but you have to worry sometimes about weather events, dust, and so forth. It's a slower lens than some of the primes, so you might have to adjust your ISO. You'll have a little bit more depth of field than what you want. But those are the main compromises I can think of. But I am deliberate when I use my primes versus my zooms.
I mean, I think you've said pretty much everything that I wanted to unpack throughout this episode in one go. So let's pick out those areas and talk about them, because I remember when I first started getting serious about photography, the advice was always invest in your glass. You can't beat a prime lens. The quality of the optics is so, is far superior to that, of a zoom. And at the time, that was good advice. But I think that, when people get into a habit of there's got to be this way, it's got to be this way, and they always try to justify that argument because that's how it's always been. I don't think it's like that anymore. And there are plenty, and so there are lots of advantages and disadvantages to both. And you make a lot of you've just made a lot of good points and covered a lot of the ground that I want to cover in this, with the things that you said. But I think let's start with quality, because I really want to. I think there are a few myths that go around about the quality of prime versus zoom, and normally the way that's tackled, and I will state right now, there is no shadow of a doubt in my mind that the quality of a prime lens over the equivalent zoom, the prime lens wins, hands down. It does, absolutely. But it depends what benchmark you're looking at it from. Because if you can go onto YouTube and there are plenty of reviews that will look at a prime 500, for example, f4, and then they will take a zoom or a 600 f4, whatever it is, and they will take the equivalent zoom by the same manufacturer, and they'll take an image of the same stuffed toy normally, or test card with both lenses with the same camera body at the same focal length, and then they'll blow it up to 200 or 300%, and they'll go, look, you can see that one lens is slightly sharper than that lens, so it's better. And my argument with that is, yes, okay, if you look at things microscopically like that, you can't argue with that. There is a difference, and the prime lens is better. But let's talk about using these images in the real world, and in a practical sense. Where do you use most of your images? And it's on Instagram or other social media outlets, or if you're like me, you might have things published in the magazine every now and again. You might use it to illustrate your articles. There's no way in the world that somebody's going to be able to tell the difference between something taken with a prime lens and the quality of the zoom lenses that are available now. If you're looking at them, in that way, and you via that media, that you cannot tell the difference. So practically, I would say that argument is, pretty thin, because I just don't see the point. When you're looking at using these images practically, there's really that much difference in terms of the quality. I don't know how you feel about that, Josh.
I'm with you. I mean, when it comes to quality, if you consider depth of field, a shallower depth of field to be more aesthetically pleasing, then I guess if you can associate that with quality, you can do a direct comparison between an f4 600 and, in my case, a 100 to 500 f7.1, or what's the Sony and the Nikon? It goes to 600, but it's f6.3 maybe.
6.3,
yeah. So I guess you can make that distinction. The other thing, the techie specs, which always bothered me too, they'll show the MTF charts at f8, and they'll talk about distortion around the edges of the lens, or and I mean, we're all wildlife photographers. We all do a little bit of cropping anyhow. So to me, the edges never really mattered. I always thought, to your point, where you talk about the laboratory controlled testing, and there's a little bit more sharpness if you zoom in 200 times. I mean, that's one standard. And again, the edges, f8, the MTF charts, it all goes out the window in a practical sense. So I don't even think it's a good comparative tool. To me, it's all about aesthetics and what you like. What you want to come out of that. That should be the determinant.
And it's all about practicality as well. Because let's face it, there are situations where if you had, let's say, a 600mm prime versus, in my case, the 180 to 600, which has got an internal zoom function, which is one of the reasons I upgraded from the 200 to 500. Well, where was I going with this? I've completely lost my train of thought. Yeah, so that was one of the reasons that I went from, the 180, if the 200 to 500, the 180 to 600 was that internal zoom. But they're so much more flexible, to my mind. There are images that I would miss if I had the 600 prime versus the flexibility of the zoom, that ability to zoom in and zoom out and everything else. So I find the flexibility of that for the way I shoot. And I think this is the whole point, isn't it? It's all about your style of photography. There's no right or wrong answer here in terms of prime versus zoom. I just think it's the best tool to suit your style. And for me, it's the zoom, because it just, as you say, it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of the control over composition that gives you. Because if you've got a 600mm prime and you're too close, you don't want to disturb your subject by moving back, so you haven't got that option. And I have to say that with one of the things that really irked me about the 2 to 500 with the Nikon, and I don't know whether this is the same for your Canon, Josh, is the throw of that focal, the focal twist on the barrel. The throw, so i.e. the distance you have to move it to get it from 180 to 600, or in your case 100 to 500. On the 200 to 500 was, I mean, honestly, it's like turning the wheel of a tractor. It took me ages, but they've sorted that out with a 180 to 600, and the throw is really tight.
It's so more smoother.
Literally, it's quarter of a turn, and you're between the 180 600 or anything in between you want. So it's much, much better. And I said the internal.
Can you control the tension of it, Rob? Can you control the tension? Because I know Canon has where you can adjust where it's like super light, where it almost falls into place. And then you can adjust the tension where you really have to physically give it a bit more oomph, for it to turn.
No, the Nikon hasn't.
I kind of like that function.
Yeah, and that would be great, actually. I think they used to have that. They had a locking button on the 2 to 500 with the external thing, so you could lock it at 200mm, so that it didn't extend if you were holding it with the lens pointing down and the gravity was pulling at it. I guess with the internal zoom, you probably don't need that so much. I don't know, but no, it hasn't.
Yeah,
it hasn't
maybe. Okay, interesting.
But the other thing that is going for primes, I have to say, and I wouldn't say I would never do it, but I would rarely do it, is attach a teleconverter to a zoom.
I've done it before. Rarely, but I've done it.
I have done it, but yeah, you get the images back. And you know what? I think I would rather crop tighter to an image that I've taken without a teleconverter than use the teleconverter, because the result is probably better, because the teleconverter, well, one, it takes away another stop or two of light, which is not
you're
good.
At like F9, F11, surprise.
That's not great. And it affects the autofocus performance, obviously, and the light gathering and all that stuff that you need. And they end up a bit soft. I just have this feeling they probably wouldn't notice any difference on social media again, or when you print them in a magazine. But when you're editing images, I just can't. I just don't like looking at them when I know what they could look like. And I think because I've got 45 megapixels in the Z9, you just think, well, I'll use that. I was saying to you, wasn't I, before we started, that I've just written an article for Birdwatching magazine, and I've got a picture of a kestrel in there, which I took on while I was taking Sky out for a walk on Salisbury Plain. See, this is the other thing about zooms, actually, is the light. So because they're lightweight, and I know there are now lighter weight options for prime lenses, particularly with the Nikon, and their PF series. They've got the 800 and the 500 PF, which are super lightweight. So I get that, but they do compromise on minimum aperture with those. But the zoom is so light, I can carry that around. If I go and walk Sky for 4 or 5 miles, I can carry it around quite happily. It's not a problem.
Mm.
But I cropped that image, the resulting image, by 75%, and it still prints fine at, well, what is basically A5 in a magazine, but it would do a double page spread without,
Yeah.
really any quality dropping off or any noticeable quality issues. That's for sure. And then don't forget,
Right.
we've got interpolation software that's pretty bloody good these days as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember I used to have the old Canon 100 to 400, and I'd put a doubler on there, extender, and I used to have to focus manually on. That was kind of, sometimes what I would do is I'd have, for my kit, I'd have a backpack, the 100 to 400 and a 1.4 and a 2 times extender. And it gives you a lot of versatility, right? In terms of, but it's not the best. It's not
I have
the
to say
best.
the results are horrible.
Yeah, it wasn't too good.
Yeah. It's
I
like,
try
so
to manually focus. And with no tripod, I'm like, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So teleconverters, for the vast majority of what I do with zoom lenses, they're no go, and they're a
Yeah.
kind of last resort for me.
Yeah.
I have to admit, and so that's rare. That's rare. I said I'd rather crop more heavily, and I said I've got the pixel count to do it. So I'd rather do that.
I find a lot of people, when they're fairly new in wildlife photography, maybe this is, kind of a more beginner approach. They'll put 1.4, 2 times, doublers on a lot of longer primes just to get more reach, to get to subjects. But, I don't do that now. If I ever use my telephoto, my extenders, my 1.4, my 2 times, it's on my 600. And it's not to get to the reach to the subject, but it's for details. It's something super tight. If I want to get the eye and maybe the texture of a bill, it's already when you're close to the animal and you really want to go in tight and just get a piece of it, almost like a macro-like photo of a bird or a bison or whatever.
Yeah, see, that's a really good point, actually, because when I first started getting serious about this, I always thought that it was the long lenses that gave people the ability to take the images that I saw in magazines. Now, of course, it's part of it, but most of it is actually you still need to get close to the subject. I
The
mean,
field craft, yeah.
you need that field craft. And here's the point: you were talking about depth of field earlier, and the fact that obviously you compromise on minimum aperture with the telephoto lenses, but the thing that has more impact over depth of field is the distance your subject is from the lens itself. I mean, if you're closer to something and you're at 600 mil and it's almost at minimum focusing distance, then it doesn't really matter whether you're at f4 or f8, quite frankly.
You get like a whisker or a piece of an eyebrow in focus in the eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
Like
so
puffins. Remember Bob and
back,
Shetland? I mean, we couldn't imagine taking a 600 prime to Shetland with puffins. You would never use it because they're right next to you.
Yeah, and good luck with getting that in your cabin baggage as well. That's the other thing with a prime, unless obviously you go down the sort of equivalent sort of Nikon PF or equivalent type lens. I mean, a Canon doing
you take
anything
the boat
like that?
from Aberdeen and you white knuckle it the whole time, and everything you ate goes overboard by the time you land in Shetland.
And the other thing is, if you're on a boat and things and you're trying to handhold a 600 millimeter prime, good luck with that. Getting the shots that I could get with a 180 to 600 zoom.
Yep.
And that's the other advantage, of a zoom. And I think one of the other major things, obviously, that we haven't touched on yet, and you didn't mention actually in the sort of first comments that you made, was price.
That's true. That's huge. That's
It
a huge difference.
It is huge. And when you think about it, and you take yourself back 15 years, and the zooms that were on the market then, A, the quality, and B, the focal range that they had. We're worlds apart now. Worlds apart. I mean, that the Nikon 180 to 600. There were a number of reasons that I decided in the end to sell the 2 to 5 and buy the 180 to 600. Not only because obviously, having gone mirrorless with a Z9 and comparing it with the 850, as I think we've talked about before, for me, I couldn't bring myself to use the 850 anymore, because so I sold that as well, and sort of bought the 180 to 600. One, there was no internal zoom. It's an internal zoom lens, as opposed to the external zoom of the 2 to 500, which is a great advantage, not only, as you were saying, about the problem with dust, which is inevitably going to happen in the end, getting into the lens chamber, but it was also, I found that external, that sort of external zoom thing, the lens would become very unbalanced very, very quickly with the weight distribution change as a thing moved in and out, and I just didn't like it. But the thing that really sold me on it in the end was the minimum focusing distance on the 180-600 was a lot less than the 2 to 500, and I used the 2 to 500 a lot to photograph things like flowers and fungi and stuff like that, because I found it produced some really artistic effects with that long focal length, and being able to get closer to those things was a really big advantage for me. So that's the other reason. And finally, it was the throw of the zoom that is just, compared to the 2 to 5, it's almost life-changing, that, and it's not made enough of in the reviews that are done of that lens. So those are the three reasons that I changed. And I said it's just so versatile and so light compared to the zoom, and it costs, well, I mean, if you bought retail from one of the major sort of retail sellers in the UK, round about £1,800 maybe, but I bought it from one of these sort of offshore sellers and managed to get it for about 1,400, I think it was, in the end, so a lot less. And I guess in the US they're going around about $1,500, something like that, 15 to 1,700 bucks, I don't know, but so it's around about that price range. And when you're looking at the 600mm f4, which is a different beast altogether, I absolutely accept that, it's £13,500, so you're looking at almost 10 times the price.
Yeah. And in a way, I think to your point, Rob, and it's a really, really important point, the advent of a lot of these zoom lenses, which are much more affordable than primes, and it gets you that same distance in terms of focal length and so forth, and flexibility and other things as well. In a way, it's democratized photography over the years. I mean, we talked a little bit in our last discussion. You go back so many years, there were only a few photographers out there. It was a very niche thing. The equipment was heavy. It was big. It was super expensive. But now you have a lot of people who have wanted to get into wildlife photography, but it's been cost prohibitive. Getting a zoom, getting an older DSLR, or investing in a mirrorless camera. It doesn't. I mean, it's still very expensive, but it doesn't really break the bank for everyone, and it gets more people in the field and the ability to go out and shoot. So I think it's led to more photographers out there.
Yeah, the entry price has come right down, hasn't it? Let's face it. I mean, if you bought, I don't know, I mean, obviously you'd need a Z. I'm talking purely Nikon here because that's what I know. But if you bought the 180 to 600 for £1,400, and if you wait a little while, there'll be some secondhand ones on the market if there aren't already. And you'd have to pair that with obviously a Z mount camera. So you'd need a mirrorless camera body with that, but you could buy a Z7 II now for, I don't know, £1,200, £1,300, £1,500 maybe. So the whole thing for £3,000, you could have something that you take yourself back 10 or 15 years would cost you 20. So look at the difference and how that has changed, and how that the accessibility of that, the equipment has become much broader because of what's available. And I think, that's got to be celebrated, surely.
Yeah, I completely agree.
This accessibility, to bring people into the same arenas as people were 20 years ago, I just think is amazing. And let's face it, the quality of the zooms now, the image quality, I was always skeptical. Excuse me. I was always skeptical of the quality up until the point where I bought the 2-500 f5.6 for the Nikon, and then reviewing some of those pictures, I was completely amazed at how good they were. And I just think that set a standard, and the Canon equivalents as well. And of the other manufacturers, let's not get too manufacturer specific here, but I think, if you're in a competitive industry, everybody needs to keep up, with who's leading the field. So they're all going to be good. I mean, the OM system, for example, that Micro Four Thirds, that, you look at the 300mm prime that they did, which is actually quite affordable, was really good. That worked well with a teleconverter, but they've got some outstanding zoom options as well, which will give you tremendous focal reach.
With Canon, and I've been shooting Canon, ever since I started shooting, it's been the quality greatly improved when it came to zoom lenses on their 100-400 Mark II, which probably came out, I don't know, 14 years ago or something around that. The original 100-400 was pretty crappy. Everybody hated that lens. There was a 400 kit lens. It was just a fixed 400 f5.6 that people bought. That was better, actually, in terms of quality. So it's been many, many years now since, the quality greatly increased. And I think, since then, like the RF lenses, the newer mounts on the mirrorless, I think it's been an incremental upgrade to a certain extent, but it hasn't been as drastic as the bump that you saw years ago. I'm sure Nikon's the same.
Yeah. And when you think actually about how the pixel counts have increased over the years as well, that has the effect of magnifying all the imperfections when you look at it on the screen, right? I mean, if you're looking at a 45 megapixel image as opposed to a 20 megapixel image or 24 megapixel image, that, those imperfections are going to be more than doubled, really, when you're looking at it on the screen. So when you look at it like that, and then you look at an image that's coming from a zoom, and you're looking at it 45 megapixels and you've got it 200% on your screen, and you're still being impressed by it, it's got to tell you something about the quality of the optics and the advancements that have been made. It would be interesting, wouldn't it, to put a prime lens from, I don't know, the 80s or 90s onto a 45 megapixel camera and just compare the quality of that with the lens, because 35mm films are world apart, which is what they were designed for.
What's interesting, though, you mentioned it, maybe not as relative to this conversation, but one thing I have noticed, like I have a Canon 200 f2. It's a prime lens, but it's really old. It's like 24 years old or something like this. And I've heard this because I see it in the quality of the pictures. They're not as sharp. There's a bit of softness to it when you take like profile shots of animals and birds and what have you. But it's very pleasing, actually. It's aesthetically pleasing. And I've noticed that newer lenses and whatnot, it's just so much more tack sharp. But when you have just a little bit of softness, it probably matters more with people, actually, with portraits and faces and whatnot. But I have noticed it with wildlife. And I'm told, a lot of these older lenses, too, if you go back, it's more prime than zoom, from what I hear and what I'm told. Like a lot of older lenses, they just have a certain look to them. And there's more softness, but yet it's aesthetically pleasing and it's a certain type of look. I think it goes back.
I think it goes back to that. I think it goes back to that fall off, doesn't it? That fall off from the point where that it's in focus through to the gradual sort of fading away into the out of focus areas. And I think it's that you're talking about. It's that
it looks pleasing to me. Yeah. I mean, in some of the images, I can tell that I shot it with that lens.
And there are certain things where you want a bit of softness, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about everybody. Everybody goes on about how, it's got to be tack sharp. It's this, that, and that's what they look for. They're blowing their images up, and you can see every little feather barb and this, that, and the other. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I get it. If you're taking images where you want to identify, for identification purposes or illustrative purposes, I get the fact that would be pleasing, and I quite enjoy it as well sometimes when you go in really tight and you go, wow, I can see everything. I can see my reflection in that bird's eye, that sort of thing. It is quite say amusing. It's quite nice to see it. But for the sort of stuff I do, sharpness comes into it, but it doesn't play, a major role in lots of stuff that I do. In lots of cases, I want a lot of out of focus stuff. So I want out of focus foregrounds and backgrounds. I want that nice, soft, arty feel to it, and I want it to be sharp in the right place, because I want the area I want sharp is where I want the viewer to focus their attention on a lot of the time, and everything else I want soft. So
there is the extreme opposite on that too, which bothers the hell out of me. A lot of people do this. It's post-processing. So they'll shoot an image and the eyes and maybe the mouth will be sharp, and they'll like slide the clarity slider and the texture slider down, and everything else is kind of soft-ish around it, including, the feathers, fur, or whatever, the rest of the body of the animal. And it looks like a cartoon to me. It looks so fake. And then you add in this like fake light from heaven coming from the corner. Oh, it bothers.
Do you remember?
It's in my opinion, but
do you remember the when years ago when people used to smear Vaseline around their filter on the lens to try and get that artificial blur? It's kind of like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it was done in other industries too. I think.
Hey, well, let's not go there, huh? I knew I shouldn't have brought Vaseline into the conversation. Anyway, let's move on. Oh God, I don't know where to move on from there, to be honest with you. But anyway, say something, Josh.
Sharpness, yes,
sharpness. Ah, dear. Well, you see, here's the other thing about the quality of lenses and the sharpness and everything else, and where this whole thing comes from. If you were looking at film, the ability to affect the sharpness of an image was slightly limited in terms of the sort of post-processing process. That's a whole lot different now. I mean, with AI and all these, these programs coming in, all these apps or whatever they want to call them now, you can take something that's relatively soft and actually put it through some of these programs, and it comes out the other end looking entirely different, and taking away a lot of those frailties that the lens might deliver to the original image. But so there is that as well. I mean, that's not something that was available until relatively recently, certainly the last 5 years or so. So that you've got those things as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Topaz and some of these other, even in Lightroom now, and I think Adobe Camera Raw, they have some of this functionality. And the hardest thing I think to do in post, it's still difficult in my opinion, is to blur the background. People will use, like, the old school way was like Gaussian blur, which adds all kind of banding and artifacts in your image. I think it's much easier to go in and out of sharpness, but when it comes to like blurring backgrounds, Orton effect type stuff, it's not exactly there yet. When you want to, a lot of people will try to just completely blur the background, and you can do it, but it's hard to do it without artifacts, banding, and just having it look incredibly fake.
Yeah,
meaning they're trying to get around the depth of field thing. They're trying to make an f2.8 out of an f9 or something like that.
You've got to be subtle about it as well. That's the thing, if you, because I mean, I've done it. I mean, I think we've all probably played around with it. I mean, particularly with, I particularly like it with woodland photography, actually, where you want most of the stuff in focus, but to add that bit of softness to it in places is,
and that's easier. I think that's easier.
Yeah,
where it's hard is where you have branches in the background and stuff, and you're just going to scramble the whole thing into a green blur.
It's not going to happen. No, that's not going to happen. And I actually think you need to embrace, the sort of original image more, rather than trying to create something fake out of it. It's just, that's the way it is. I mean, it's nature, and that's what I want to create with my images. It's just a sort of natural representation of what I saw, or some sort of artistic interpretation I can put on that using, in-camera techniques. I mean, the other thing is, who wants to sit there in front of the computer all day and add all these effects and
Oh,
spend
I
loads of
know.
time. Just does my head in, to be honest. But
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people love the post processing piece as much as taking the image. I wouldn't say I'm that, I may be 70-30, preference in terms of the field. I mean, I get pleasure out of the post processing when I really love an image and I love seeing it come to
yeah,
life. More so with printing, though. That to me really it's very appealing to me. But then again, you're only printing images you super, super care about and that like are at the top of your portfolio or you want to put on display or whatever. You don't do that for everything in your workflow. But that I think is much more pleasing than, noise reduction and sharpening.
yeah. Well, here's the thing. Actually, if people printed their images more often, because I'm with you. I mean, I think to hold something sort of physically in your hand and look at the final printed image doesn't happen often enough, and it gives you a real sense of, I think,
Pride.
yeah, and it gives you a real sense of how the overall image works as well by seeing it in a different media to what's on your screen, because your screen will just display it in a different way because it's backlit. You're looking
Yeah.
at reflective light when you're looking at a print, and it's a whole different experience. And I think, if once you've seen an image in both ways, I think the printed image, if it's large enough, will certainly show you frailties that you didn't know existed before. So forget your pixel peeping. I think just yeah, a final printed image however large you want to make it, but A3 or whatever. I just think it's where it's the ultimate satisfaction I get is when I've printed something that I've taken and it comes out really nicely.
Holding it.
And and holding it in your hands, and it's also the choice of paper and this, that, and the other can make a
Yeah.
hell of a difference. The tone, the color of the paper, the texture of the paper, the way it absorbs the ink is also different.
If I could make a musical comparison, it's just more analog, right? And I think, having it in your hand, like you said, the texture, seeing it, the physicality of it. I'm doing the same for music now. I think we talked a little bit about this. Like, I'm bringing out older records. I play records, cassette tapes. I'm even looking to get a reel-to-reel player potentially. So there's just something about it. We've been streaming and been in this like digital age now for so long where everything's just not in front of you and it's not tangible. And there's a certain desire for that. It's people want to go back to that. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and actually people want to go back to that never experienced that in the first place. Because I mean, let's face it. I mean,
That's true.
you've got
Yeah.
to be of a certain age, as I am, to remember that thrill of buying, a new album from somebody. And you get the album cover, and then you take the thing out of the album cover, and particularly if it had a double album cover. Do you remember those that opened up like a book and you had all the extra stuff on the inside? And then you looked at the artwork, and I said he took the record out, and then he took it out of its inner sleeve, and then you had that little scratch as the needle sort of hit the vinyl for the first time. And I said that analog, I think it's such a great analogy, that feeling of analog versus digital. Digital takes away all the imperfections, all the little, the scratches.
I think it makes you less mindful of it as well. So if I print out an image and I'm holding that image in my hand in paper and I'm looking at it, I'm more mindful of it. I think I'm more attention focused on it. I'm holding it. Just like if I put a record on, it's deliberate. I'm going to sit in the living room and listen to that record versus you're surfing the web and it's like, oh, you know what? I haven't heard that Pink Floyd song in a while. You hit your Spotify and you play it and it's just in the background. I think holding an image, looking at it, examining the print, you're just more present minded and center focused with it than if you're on Photoshop, you save your JPEG and you load it on your website. I think it's different.
And with music, you can move on from that song, Whereas if you put an album on vinyl, you got to listen to the whole thing unless you want to pick the needle up and move it across physically, which you're not going to do. Let's face it. So I agree. It's this sort of skipping the whole experience sometimes. I think with it's made so easy for us, isn't it? Next. It's like 20 frames a second. How many images of the same thing? Next. You're skipping through all the images you've taken in that sequence to try and pick the best one, and you might not linger on something that might hold something special for long enough.
Yeah.
And I think that, so the analogy is with music and records is brilliant, which sort of has taken us down a road we, as usual, I didn't think we were going to go down. I mean, we were talking about Prime versus Zoom, but I guess, I think people who listen to this podcast by now know that,
I think so. Yeah.
Perhaps the initial subject does get slightly lost sometimes.
There is linear thought, though. There is a connection. The dots connect.
yeah, they do. I mean, it just sort of takes us, perhaps a long way off piece. But anyway, not that it matters. So I guess Prime versus Zoom. I mean, in summary, I guess I get entirely, the attraction of a prime lens, and if I had a spare 15 grand lying around, why not? I'd buy one, and I think where I would use it would be for photographing passerines, small passerines. Probably that would be it. I don't think I'd use it for anything else, which is why I've never bought one, because it's just no point in spending that amount of money for a very small proportion of the photography that I do. And I think that we have never had it. Well, I know we've never had it so good to be able to have that quality that something like, the 180 to 600 Nikon will deliver, or the, equivalent Canon, the 100 to 500. Just think, how lucky we are to be able to have access to the quality of those bits of equipment for such little money compared to 20 years ago. I just think it's quite amazing. It's transformed my photography, and I know from the limited amount of pictures I've taken with the 180 to 600, I love it to hell. I tell you, love it to hell. And I just, the ability to be able to go out with one lens and it pretty much cover 95% of anything you'd want. For me, that's almost nirvana. Anyway, I hope people again have enjoyed that discussion. I know that the Prime versus Zoom thing is something where people have had healthy debate before, and I'm sure we'll continue to do so. But there's a place for both, and for me, I'm in the Zoom camp, quite frankly, as I think people will have gathered. But if somebody out there, if a sponsor out there wants to let me have a Prime, then who am I to turn them down? Nikon. Not that'll happen. But anyway, no, I hope people have enjoyed that chat. We'll see what we come up with the next time. But what's next for you, Josh?
Not much. I've got a little bit of travel. I'm heading out to trying to get out. Matter of fact, I got to see if I can get my plane ticket tonight. To
San Francisco. You're going to, right?
Yeah, big picture, and then things are going to be moving soon. Ducks will be back in a little bit, so fall color next month. I'll try to get out and shoot some scapes.
Yeah, we've got all that.
Yeah. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to the cooler weather, the seasonal change, and we'll see what happens. It's autumn color, or fall as you call it, and the autumn migrants, and we'll see what comes through. But I do love this time of year. I have to say, I love the seasons of transition. So the spring and autumn, far better than, well, I guess winter as well. Summer's the time photographically I find the most difficult, because there's not a lot really going on and things are just a bit dull and boring. Whereas winter, you can get that magical light and those amazing atmospheric conditions. With autumn, you've got all that color, and with spring, you've got all that freshness and greenery around. Summer, I always find a little bit uninspiring. So I'm looking forward to the next few months, that's for sure. So anyway, good stuff. Hope everybody's enjoyed that, and we'll see you all again next time. Thanks all.
You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.